moment. There we are. Cool. Hi, everyone. So a few years ago, I built a website for my mother. My mother paints. This is a painting she painted. And like most artist websites, it features a list of artworks. The way that I stored the data for this artwork was in a JS file. So you just have one big object that has, it's like a map-like object. And this worked pretty well for me. But I'm curious, how easy do you think it is for my mom to update this website? And obviously it's difficult, but if we go through the reasons why, the first is that and by the way, it's a safe assumption that my mom isn't a software engineer. What is this even, right? Why is there a squiggly bracket? What are these numbers? Which admittedly is kind of strange even for developers, but that's the way I built it. I built this in Inferno, by the way, which should give you a sense of when this was. The other thing is that because it's in JavaScript, you actually have to know the rules of this, right? Because if you mess it up, the best case is that your site doesn't deploy. The worst case is that you bring the whole thing down. And lastly, it's checked into Git, which, that's a whole other thing that, we just take for granted that, you have to learn how to use a terminal, and there's a whole set of commands. So it's not super easy. It leads to a really high barrier to entry to update these kinds of sites. And if you compare that to something like WordPress, I just created a WordPress site, and it's still not trivial. There's a lot of buttons, and it's a lot of UI, but it's so much easier, right? The barrier to entry is so much lower. So we always talk about user experience, the end user, the person, the website visitor. And we talk about our own experience as developers. But there's another seat at this table, right? There's the people that create the content, the artists, the marketers, the salespeople, all the people that are involved in creating the products that we build. And I put an asterisk on non-technical. That asterisk is doing a lot of work. Because I don't think, I don't know that it's really fair. Often, a lot of these people actually are pretty technical. It's just that, their full-time job isn't software development. It's, one of many things that they do. So if we break down what these things are kind of, cohort by cohort, well, from a user experience perspective, and this we're talking about the way that I did my mom's website, it's pretty good because it's all in a JS bundle, right? There's no API calls, there's no database lookups. You get pretty good performance out of that, and so that makes users happy. The developer experience is pretty great because it's just all code, right? It's what we like to do anyway. But the content creator experience, CCX, is pretty much non-existent because there's no way for them to update it. If we compare that to something like WordPress, and I'm picking WordPress here, but really any sort of all-inclusive, Squarespace is another one, Shopify if you use all of Shopify. The user experience is a bit of a mixed bag. Sometimes it can be good, but often these platforms give you so much that they're not super fast out of the box, and because they're not doing everything at compile time, you wind up paying for that. Developer experience, and this is maybe a little unfair. I haven't developed for WordPress in a long time, so I'm not the best person to ask. But I feel with a lot of these platforms, because they're this monolithic, one way to do thing, I can't bring the tools that I already know and like. From a content creator perspective, though, it's pretty great because you have all of this tooling built up that lets you create the stuff and do your job. I've seen this image before. I'm sure many people have seen this image before. And the idea is that if you want to build something, it can either be good and cheap, but not fast. Good and fast, but not cheap. And if you build something quickly and without spending a lot of money, it's probably not going to be good. And it makes me think, is this the way that it is, right? Do we have to pick two groups out of the three and just sacrifice one of their experiences? And I don't buy into that, right? I don't think so. So there has to be a better way. My favorite thing in the world is the parts of the infomercial where they show you the before, right? The person just living their life and everything is a catastrophe. You take one bite out of your taco and the whole thing explodes. So this talk is called Empowered Development with Gatsby. As introduced, my name is Josh. I work at Gatsby. I'm a cat person. I also really like Beat Saber, which is a VR video game. And I want to highlight this one just for a moment. If you have a pet, and if you have your phone on you, and if you have a Twitter account, I would absolutely love for you right now to tweet a picture of your cat or dog or miscellaneous pet. That's going to come back later in the talk, so If you can, I'd really appreciate it. OK, so we have to talk about, oh, and let me just repeat the hashtag, Gatsby Days Pets, hashtag Gatsby Days Pets. I did this at a conference a few months ago, and it's really kind of selfish, right? Like, I just like looking at pets, but I'm up on stage, so I can do what I want. OK, so we have to talk about the Headless CMS. And I guess just to make sure that we all have the same context, a CMS stands for Content Management System, I think. There's really kind of two pieces to it that I think are like irreducible. Like, you need these two things. The first is that you need relational data in like a structured way, and then you need some sort of way to update that data. So this first point, structured relational data model, it's, so here we have a blog post, and that blog post has properties. It's not quite like SQL data types, right? Like, it's a little bit higher level, so like content is a rich text type, and it's relational. So a blog post can have one or maybe multiple authors. Authors can have multiple blog posts, and each of these models have properties. Then we need the UI for that. And for Gatsby.js, we use Contentful, which is a headless CMS. This is what it looks like. It gives you a form, and you can fill stuff out in that form. It's a pretty friendly UI. I think that like monolithic CMSs like WordPress, they give you a whole bunch of other stuff. So like they give you templates. They give you a nice way to update those templates, user accounts, e-commerce, and then there's this rich plugin ecosystem where like pretty much anything you want, you can get. And all that stuff is what they call the head. I think this is kind of weird, right? Like, you think the data model would be the brain and everything else would be. So I don't understand the naming, but that's the way it is. A headless CMS doesn't have the front end that users experience. So instead, you get the data from it out of an API. And it doesn't really have any sort of opinions. Like, it doesn't dictate how you use that data. So the way that we use it at Gatsby, a little bit of a code sample. As you would expect, Gatsby.js.com is a Gatsby app. So we have our use static query hook. And then it's just a GraphQL query. So we're saying, like, give me all of the FAQs from Contentful, filter it by the category, because here we only want the questions that are part of the docs. And then we specify the data that we want from it. So we want to get the questions and the answers. And we want the answers in HTML format. So then a little bit further down, we can just map through this data and build up our React tree using whatever React components we want. And so we talk a lot about the content mesh. And the idea behind this, the fundamental theory, is that we're going to take a whole bunch of different services. So instead of letting WordPress do everything, we're going to pull Shopify for commerce and Stripe for payments and Auth0 for auth. And I think the idea here is that we kind of assume that if we're letting companies specialize, they're probably going to do a better job. I like to think of this, so this is a photo from the Singaporean night markets. I should start by saying that I've never been to Singapore, and the extent of my knowledge on this is from the book Crazy Rich Asians, which is a fantastic book. But if this book is to be believed, the way these markets work is that you have 600 individual vendors, or many hundreds, and they all just prepare one dish, and that dish has been refined through generations. So you wind up with these this unbelievable selection of unbelievably good dishes. And you compare that to going to the restaurant that has pages and pages, 400 menu items. And if you were to just pick one at random, you might be the first person ever to order that item. Where do you think you're going to get a better meal from? And we can think about this in terms of products. I probably think Stripe is going to handle payments better than WordPress. Or Shopify might handle e-commerce better than WordPress. I don't actually know. This is just kind of my assumption. So in theory, headless CMSs can do the CMS part better than a monolithic one, because a headless CMS can focus entirely on the content management part of the CMS. But I think the drawback there is that a huge benefit that WordPress has is that they manage everything, and so they can integrate everything together. There's this cohesive system. And one way that we see this as a disadvantage when we move to a headless CMS is that in a WordPress-like CMS, content creators can preview the content because WordPress has both the data and the view layer. But when you move to a headless CMS, there's not really any way to preview it. And we can imagine, so this is an article from today, and this is what it looks like on the website, and this is what it might look like in a CMS. And as a content creator, your goal, in a headless CMS world, all you can see is this, and you have to kind of picture this one in your head and hope that when you click publish, everything formats right and it looks right. And it's the same thing as like when we develop. Like you need that real-time feedback. You want to see what it looks like before you publish it. Imagine writing HTML and not being able to see the output until you deploy it. Doesn't seem good. So bit of a plug, Gatsby Cloud has this thing called Preview, which kind of does this. I feel like I can brag about this because this was built before I joined the team, so I'm not just tooting my own horn. The idea is that inside your CMS now, you get this new block. And essentially, every time you edit a field, Gatsby's running this process in the background, where it's rebuilding your site. It does it in develop mode, the same way that you do on your own computer, so it's super fast. And it gives the content creators this real-time feedback. What's cool about this, too, is that like on WordPress, you're just previewing a page, whereas on this, it's your entire site. It gives you a URL you can share, so stakeholders can check it out. And if you change a data model that changes the same thing across multiple pages, right? So maybe you want to see the blog post itself, but also the list view that shows that blog post. It's the entire site. And like, it's also just really cool. Like, it gives you hot reload, and it even preserves scroll position. So if you're editing something in the footer, it's not like every keystroke means that you have to refresh the page and scroll back down. So it really is like it's an equivalent latency to what you get on localhost when you're developing, which is like pretty cool. And CMSs are really starting to take advantage of this. So Sanity is a headless CMS. It's kind of hard to see what's going on here. Let me see if I can zoom. So on the left, we have what is a typical CMS interface. So you have a text box and other form fields. On the right, you have an iframe. And the iframe is showing you like what your website looks like in the preview. So like literally as you're typing in the same window, you're seeing what that does, which is pretty cool. I also think that like as I was preparing this talk, I started realizing that this idea is really powerful, and it goes far beyond just copy changes, because content is more than just copy. Like we typically think that like content in a blog post is the title and the actual image and the paragraphs. But you can do a lot more than that. And one way that I saw this is how we handle navigation on Gatsby.js.com. So this is our website, not to be confused with Gatsby.js.org. This is our company website. And along the top there, you'll see that you have this navigation. It's like, you have the typical drop-down navigation. And it's worth noting that the navigation, there's several types. So the Why Gatsby link is bold. It has an arrow and a description. How it works is kind of the same style, but without the description. And then we have these other ones here that aren't bold and have an icon. What's cool is that all of this data lives in our CMS. It doesn't live in the code base. So the way that that actually works is that here we have, I think we called it header navigation. And it has some children on the left, some children on the right. And so those correspond to the left navigation and the right navigation. If we drill down further, each one of these navigation items has a title, an href, and several children of their own. And if we go down that one more level, we see that there's all kinds of fields that this one has. So like, whoops, variant is how we get the bold version and the not bold version. We also have color. We have a description. So we're adding properties in our CMS that map to the props we have in our React component. And it means that content creators can really like fine-tune elements that we wouldn't normally think of as living in a CMS. So if I just model this out a little bit, I have my header navigation, which has navigation items, which themselves have drop-down items. And then we have this set of props. So the type we can actually constrain. It's kind of hard to see because it's like way at the bottom. But, oh God, how do I zoom? The type is like one of two very specific options, and we can validate that. And then same thing with color. It's not just like a hex color code. We actually can specify these are the colors that we want to allow, and those map to our design tokens. So it's a powerful idea, right, that content is more than just copy. And what I like about this is that it opens up this world that we're all familiar with as developers of like React components are these little building blocks that we can assemble. And like, why am I all, OK, yeah, that makes sense. It's kind of like, imagine if we could create these little blocks. So we have an image hero. And we can think about what the API of that would look like. We have an image on the right, a title, and then some miscellaneous children, a few lines of text. We might have a 3-column icons block, which has these 3 chunks of icons and text. Maybe a photo grid that's just this like masonry style thing. Imagine if we had like 15 of these, and then content creators could just pick the 3 or 4 that they need, and they could build these whole pages without us, the developer, being involved at all. And this isn't, well, hold on, I'm all zoomed in. I learned how to do this thing where you zoom. I thought I was so clever for figuring that out, and now it's backfiring. Oh no. Hold on. This was me. You know how in Netlify, when you have a single page app, you have to like set it up to forward? I neglected to do that. OK, this is where I was. Although I'm still kind of zoomed. No, that's OK. So like, the cool thing about this is that our marketing team can build their own landing pages. Customer service can build their own resource center pages. And I don't just mean like adding the questions and answers. I mean redesigning the pages to fit what they know they need. And developers, on the other hand, like it's not so much about just building pages anymore. Now we're building platforms so that other teams can build pages. And this isn't just a theory. So there's this agency called Delicious Simplicity. And they built this website called Starlight. So Starlight is, actually, hold on. I want to do this as a, I want to open this in a new tab so that I'm not all, that's what I was trying to avoid. OK. So why am I still so zoomed, though? OK. So Starlight is a charity. It's a really nice charity, actually. What they do is they deliver VR gaming to children in hospitals. And they have this nice website. We can pop over to their media room, and we'll see that they have these columns that link to other pages. They have these press releases, little contact form at the bottom with a little animated wave, which I really like. We can also jump to, say, deliveries, which is another page that, totally different layout, has paragraphs, has this like big banner thing. Both of these pages were built after the developers completed the project and stepped away from it. So content creators built these two pages out of the pieces that the development team at this agency provided, which is like seriously cool. OK, now I have to tab hop. OK. There's a webinar that shows how they did this. It's like an hour long, and it goes through all of the details, so I'm not going to go through too many myself. Just like also, by the way, Gatsby has these amazing webinars. You can find them there. This is one of them, and there's a whole bunch of other really cool ones. I also tweeted about this, because I was curious to see how other people are taking advantage of the fact that now we can do all these cool things. And I got a couple of cool suggestions. So someone on Twitter, Pierre Nell, creates essentially limited CSS subsets that content creators can use. So here it's like the same thing that we were looking at before, except there's actually a UI for that. I think this is insanity. And there's a few others, like they can choose text color, they can choose alignment. You can essentially build a DSL, right? Like you can come up with a very limited subset that you want to be controllable. Another really cool thing, this is also from Sanity, from UJ Lee. And the idea is that you have these little widgets. So here, it's for a recipe website. So the content creator enters, say, 30 grams, but they do it by choosing this thing. And then they choose an ingredient by picking it from a list. And then us, as the developers, we can do really cool things. Like if we're building the American version of this site, we can convert 30 grams into ounces. And we can build little smart widgets for the ingredients. Like we can build all these things that then content creators can access through these interfaces. So this all sounds pretty cool, I think. But what are the problems, right? Like, what are the drawbacks? So the first thing is that, like, this seems like kind of a new idea. And granted, nothing is new in web development. For all I know, this was popular 20 years ago, and we're just rediscovering it. But it seems new to me. And I think that there can be more work up front, because we have to build things in a way that is flexible and constrained, which can take longer than just building it ourselves, at least in the very short term. The other thing is that like you wind up with this combinatorial explosion problem, which is that like if you have too many props, then you have to think about how they all interact with each other. And you might wind up in a case where the content creators pick things that seem reasonable but interact in ways that were never anticipated. So that's the thing to watch out for. But I think that it's pretty cool. And so again, if we think about like how does this experience work for different groups? Well, the user experience seems pretty good. I really liked Kyle's talk earlier, so I had to get a bit of RuPaul in as well. Last-minute change. The developer experience also seems pretty good. This is from a Netflix show called Sheer that I just started watching. Highly recommended. What about the content creators? I tried to find like a slightly smiling face alternative for RuPaul, which turns out it's really hard because all of the, like he's either really happy or really unhappy, but I found one. What I think about that is that it's a really cool idea that we haven't done enough of to know how good it is, but it's like a really exciting possibility. A while ago, we used to hear a lot about JS fatigue, and we haven't heard about that so much anymore. The way that we used to hear about this was a new framework every week. Remember when every week people were talking about a new framework every week? I think that things have gotten a little bit more stable. We could ignore the big dips. Those are just holidays around the Christmas times. But like things, and this is downloads for different frameworks. React is the blue line. Just to show that like things are kind of straightening out. I think that now that things are kind of settling, we can focus on really like iterating and improving things. And of course, often that takes the shape of improving our developer experience. That's a big part of what Gatsby does, as well as the user experience. I think that like as this gets better and better, we have to make sure that we're making things better for everyone, including our content creator friends. This is completely shameless, I know. It's also like humbling, I think, to realize. So this chart, the red line is how many of the top 10,000 websites are built on WordPress. The blue line is React. I also recognize that WordPress uses React now, so this might not be accurate. But that caveat aside, React is like 4% of the websites in the top 10,000. So if we want to build stuff that really breaks out of our little niche, we have to make sure that we're building things that like the broader audience can actually use to build stuff. OK, one last thing. I asked people to tweet cat photos, and I injected those cat photos in this slide. So now we get to see everyone's cats and other pets. Oh my god, this is awesome. All right. Oh. OK, I very much appreciate the enthusiasm with which people did this. OK, there's more. I will let you look at those because the slides and everything are available there. Thank you.